Thomas Jefferson owned a copy of the Quran. Was he Muslim? Of course not. He did it, he owned it, he read it. However you want to look at that, he did it because he had it because he was trying to learn from it. And for a lot of different reasons. Of course, we had the situation over with Tripoli during that time, but he was trying to learn. And I don't know, there's a couple of different ways I could start today's conversation, but I want to start with the definition of objective. The definition of objective is to not be influenced by personal feelings or opinions in considering and representing facts. And when you think about reason, the fundamental principle, foundation, I guess, of deism, being objective in regard to your reason is important. Reason and objectivity, I think that those are critical. And I bring up Thomas Jefferson, just that example, because being a deist in a Christian nation and owning a copy of the Quran and learning from it was frowned upon by some. Even today, I would imagine that would be frowned upon by some. But you can pull knowledge from everywhere. If you're a deist, you can pull knowledge from the Bible. You can pull knowledge from the Quran. You can pull knowledge from the Torah. You can pull knowledge from the dictionary. If there's information to be had and somebody else is sharing it, you can benefit from it if you are willing to look at it objectively. Yes, undoubtedly, the person providing that information is going to have a little bit of bias to it. But again, if you're approaching it objectively, you're going to be able to pick some of that out at the very least. So why do I bring this up? Well, there was a conversation on one of the deists' pages, I guess, groups, talking about or alluding to Thomas Paine being a socialist, and finding reason to be socialist, I guess, as a result. And of course, I would imagine that most who follow this this channel or any of my work in any of the different realms knows that I probably, and I do, fundamentally disagree with this. And of course, we have to start looking at definition, right? Live by definition, read by definition, explore and research by definition. You're going to get a better idea of where things really are. So, of course, I responded with the idea that, I could see how somebody could say that, and I'll get to that here in a minute, but that I disagree with that. I do not believe that, and this is based on, well, and I'll get to that as well. He wasn't a socialist. Now, he did believe that communities should come together, that there should be certain things to stop things like monopolies and anything that would aid a tyrant. Sure, absolutely. But that was also somewhat common during that time. And of course, he kind of helped spearhead that idea into the minds of many. But he also argued repeatedly that the individual should reap the benefits, reap the rewards of their labor. So again, if you are personally reaping the reward of your labor, that fundamentally contradicts the idea of socialism. And I said it's not really debatable, but then I provided two very specific definitions, and these are universal definitions. I think it's important. In the idea, that socialism is a social system or theory in which the government owns or controls the means of production. And that is something that specifically Paine argued many times against. He thought people should be able to work the land as they saw fit. And then, of course, Marxist theory gets brought into it, and I'll say this again just for point that socialism is a transitional society state in Marxist theory. Socialism is a transitional social state between the overthrow of capitalism and the realization of communism, which again would be very much against what Thomas Paine believed in. Now, there are some who would try to argue that he was very much for an agrarian type society, but again, lived by definition, right? An agrarian, by definition, is a person who advocates a redistribution of landed property, especially as part of a social movement. Again, not something he was about. I'll read you something here from thomaspaine.org. Since the operation of society had made possible the existence of private property, it followed that society was entitled to receive the surplus that men accumulated beyond their own labor back to them. Paine proposed a plan to deal with the problem of poverty by providing for the taxation of accumulated property to permit the state to give each man and woman reaching the age of 21 the sum of 15 pounds, and every person 50 years of age and over 10 pounds per year. His plan, which today would be called a system of social insurance, called for graduated inheritance taxes and ground rents. Unlike many land reformers who preceded and followed him, Paine did not advocate the establishment of an agrarian society. For evidence that Paine's proposal was too moderate for some contemporary agrarians, see Thomas Spence's pamphlet published 1797, The Rights of Infants, with scriptures on Paine's agrarian justice. And, you know, again, he did advocate certain systems of tax, but it wasn't on the poor, it was on the rich, it was on those who could accumulate, those who had that power of structure. As he said, it would be impolitic to set bounds to property acquired by industry. Okay, so it's not good. It wouldn't be good to set bounds on property acquired by industry. Very simple. And you know, but he did believe that people who have a whole bunch should be taxed accordingly. You know, that tax. But here's the thing, and look, if anybody's going to actually dig in and read Thomas Paine, you'll find that, yes, he did have some pretty interesting tax plans and so on and so forth. But he was also very anti-authoritarian. Clearly, the founders were very much against big government, and that their government, their role, the role of government should be extremely limited. And he said this numerous times. I don't think the fact that that's even up for debate is beyond me. And the idea of state-controlled property would very much not fit that mold. However, the limited role of government at that point in regard to taxation and stuff like that was to ensure that you know, some of that excess would be into the hands of those who couldn't or didn't. You know, the elderly, the impoverished, the you know, the sick, the weak, whatever. And that's not so crazy, you know. And you look at like what Thomas Jefferson wanted. He thought education, for instance, should be free, you know, as far as higher education, because he knew that an educated society would be a free one. But again, that was more of we're a family type of thing, not dictation in regard to government control. So there is that thin line, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. But what we have to understand is that we had wants, wishes, and ways to try and figure out how to do that, and that goes all the way back to Locke. Everybody had different ideas. Even to this day, everybody has different ideas. I mean, look at the fair tax. The fair tax is a consumption-based tax, and that's supposed to be, the excess is supposed to be distributed back. And one of the other things that Paine said repeatedly, and this is what I was talking about earlier, is that this excess shouldn't be for government. In fact, here I'll read you a couple things here. From Rights of Man, Thomas Paine, government seemed to be placarded in need of a foe For unless it finds one somewhere, no pretext exists for the enormous revenue and taxation now deemed necessary. War is the common harvest of all those who participate in the division and expenditure of public money in all countries. It is the art of conquering at home. The object of it is an increase of revenue, and as revenue cannot be increased without taxes, a pretense must be made for expenditure. In reviewing the history of the English government, its wars and its taxes, a bystander, not blinded by prejudice nor warped by interest, would declare that taxes were not raised to carry on wars, but that wars were raised to carry on taxes. Every war terminates with an addition of taxes, and consequently with an addition of revenue, and in any event of war, in the manner they are now commenced and concluded, the power and interest of governments are increased. It is time to dismiss the inattention which has so long been the encouraging cause of stretching taxation to excess. To say that any people are not fit for freedom is to make poverty their choice, and to say that they had rather be loaded with taxes than not. If, from the more wretched parts of the old world, we look at those which are in an advanced stage of improvement, we still find the greedy hand of government thrusting itself into every corner and crevice of industry and grasping the spoil of the multitude. I'll stop right there for a second and just, I mean, I could go over this paragraph in 100 different ways, but he's clearly pointing out his disgust with overbearing, overreaching government that has its hands in everything, which again fundamentally contradicts the entire idea of socialism, being that you have state-controlled, industry, property rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, he goes on, his basic contention was that the enormous increase in taxation suffered by the people of England in the past few centuries was due to extravagance, corruption, and intrigue, maintaining that the total annual tax bill of £17 million, only £1.5 million was necessary. He proceeded to show how the remaining taxes should be disposed of. First of all, his plan provided subsidies for children so that they might be sent to school, provisions for aged persons, payments to families for childbirths and marriages, funeral payments, and accident benefits. It was a type of insurance is what he was looking at. Bad things happen. Not everybody has the excess to deal with some of these things. He was looking for a way to try and get some of the excesses from the rich. But it's taxation. But rather than it going to the government, he wanted it to go to go back to the family, not the government to be in control of it. Anyway, again, goes back to what I was saying earlier, that it would be impolitic to set bounds to property acquired by industry, and therefore it is the right to place the prohibition beyond the probable acquisition to which industry can extend. In other words, Go seek out what you can. Go prosper. Go do what you can. Make what you can. But when you start having excess, expect to be taxed on it. No doubt you're gaining that excess via the labor of those who don't have as much. So they need to be compensated accordingly. But anyway. I guess it is what it is. The point was, that it's really easy, I think, to confuse some of these ideas. And I'm talking about objectivity. The point is, when we look at something, we shouldn't try to classify it as something. Sure, Thomas Paine had what would now be considered social tenets, but he would definitely not be considered a socialist. And why is this important? It's because as a deist, what we have to do is be able to learn from something. It doesn't necessarily mean we are whatever it is. I mean, for instance, you can be conservative and learn something from liberals. You can be liberal and learn something from conservatives. But if you enter a conversation under the idea that everything you have is right and everything else somebody has to offer is wrong, you're not going to learn anything. And that's not a very deistic way to approach something. Now, I'm going to read something else here from thomaspaine.org. It's Thomas Paine National Historical Association. with a very simple question: was Thomas Paine a socialist? If by socialist we mean a state-supported welfare system to ensure the poor and working poor led comfortable lives, then yes, Paine supported a social welfare state. If by socialist, however, we mean that wealth is produced by the working class, in his day, the farmers and the mechanics, and that they should reap the benefits of that wealth, then yes as well. Paine had a labor theory of value. But if by socialist we mean the definition, it was to gain some 20 or 30 years after his death, i.e. that the working classes control the means of production through the state, then probably not. Those ideas and even the language around them had not come into use during Paine's lifetime. In his era, capitalist forces were just taking shape, and he did not foresee some aspects of that. In reference to socialism in that light, he would have no clear grasp of the issues involved. He did support the program of Babeuf and the French Revolution, but opposed his methods. The word communism was coined by Goodwin Barmby in a conversation with those he described as the disciples of Babeuf. So all in all, he seems to have supported many of the tenets of what people later referred to as socialism, but it doesn't make him a socialist. He was very much about individual freedom. Work. You can work. You can own. You can do the things that you need to do. So again, you can learn from that. And then it's not to say that, in theory, think about it. In theory, communism works, right? But in theory, it's, well, I don't know, even that could be debated. In theory, communism doesn't work either. But you know what I'm saying? There are things of a social. In fact, I think going back to the fair tax, I think the fair tax is a good example of learning from all sides and coming up with that middle solution. Now, but I think as deists, it would be hard pressed for us to. I think it would be wrong in a lot of ways to try and classify because of certain tenets. Would that make Thomas Jefferson a socialist because he wanted to provide free education? No. I don't know. There's just a million ways you could go down that road, and you look at the overall, look at the end result. I think it becomes clear. And I've said this, I'll say it again. The more I get some people have a really hard time reading Paine because of the complexities. But the more you read, the more you begin to understand that it wasn't about so much the government. It was about the people. It was about the individual. The power of thought, the power of freedom, the power of being able to make anything of your world that you wanted to. And then when anybody tried to impede on that, they were wrong. And that's where it is. Yeah, sure. If you were infringed upon, if life dealt you a bad deck or whatever the situation is, then sure, we'd like to help out because we're a big family. But it was never one of those things to be, well, I don't know. I don't know. I probably way over time on this already, but I think the point's been made. But in regard to Paine, but I would like to reiterate the importance of objectivity. Yes, you can learn from something, but that doesn't mean that you should lump everything else into it, because you're going to miss so much by doing that. Again, did he learn from, did he agree with certain tenets that are now considered social? Sure. But I think in a lot of ways we all do. I think we don't believe that tyranny is a good thing. We recognize that there is such thing as corporate corruption and so on and so forth. But there you go. There's another good example. Corporate corruption. Does that mean all business is bad? Of course not. That means that some people are corrupt, but that's human nature. People will corrupt. What do they say? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So it's the check and balance. It's looking at everything, objectively. The Democrat-Republican paradigm, for instance, looking at that situation objectively, you can see the false choices in either one, but you can also learn something from either one as well. And that's why I think that's a lot of reason why George Washington warned us of the party system, said it would destroy us. And then, of course, look at where we're at. So the point is, where I'm going with all this is to remain objective, be willing to challenge your own beliefs, be willing to hear somebody else's point of view and try to learn from it, and don't try to classify it and lump something together, because by doing so, again, you're going to misrepresent probably both the word and the person or the event or whatever it is. So, think, and don't be threatened. Don't feel threatened by information that you are unfamiliar with, or may seem to go against something that you want to believe or have believed. You can learn from that too, and you can actually build upon it. The truth of the matter is, you can call them capitalists, socialists, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant, because the end result is the same. The Declaration, the Bill of Rights, individual liberty. The right, you got to remember, life, liberty, and the pursuit of property was the original phrasing. But again, if you were to just go and lump it in under a word like socialism, then that doesn't apply anymore, because you're talking about community of property where you don't have personal property rights. And that's, I guess, again, why it's important to live by definition. But we can always learn. We can always learn if we remain objective and are willing to challenge our own beliefs. And that, to me, anyway, is a deist principle. It's to explore, to learn, not only about God, but human nature and each other. I think it's very important. So anyway, so I wanted to talk about being objective, the importance of it. I suppose I could probably get out, check the chat room. Being objective. Oops. The importance of it. Let's see. Coming from a Bernie supporter, Thomas Paine was not a socialist. Regardless of what Thomas Paine believed, you should be a free thinker and think for yourself. That's a very good point, and that's really good. So right there, and again, the importance of being a free thinker, I think, is important. And I think when you really contemplate, I think, regardless of where you fall politically, the importance of individual thought is critical. When you start getting into lumping and grouping and things of that nature, you start to get group thought and contortions of ideology and peer pressure, even, I would say, in some cases. So yeah, it's a very good point. Anyway, so hopefully we've covered something that was of use. It was just on my mind quite a bit today, so I thought I would share that. I've got some other ideas for videos coming up, so stay tuned for that. Don't forget to check out my book, Reason, Religion, and the Trinian Contradictions, available at barnesandnoble.com and amazon.com. In fact, I believe if you have a Kindle, for at least a little while longer, you can get a free download. So there's that. So if you have read it, leave a review. I would sure appreciate that. Subscribe to the channel. Does it for me. Friends, till next time. Take care.